Have you ever sat across from someone whose credentials were impeccable, whose intellectual achievements were genuinely impressive, whose capacity to process information and construct arguments and navigate the technical complexities of their particular domain was beyond reasonable question, and felt, despite all of that, something missing? Not in their knowledge, not in their analytical capacity, not in any of the measurable, certifiable, institutionally validated dimensions of what we have agreed to call intelligence. Something else. Something harder to name and considerably harder to measure, but entirely impossible to ignore once you have noticed its absence. A quality of presence. A quality of genuine contact with the actual human situation they were in, with the actual people they were with the actual emotional reality of the moment they were inhabiting. A quality of being, not merely thinking. Of actually being somewhere, not merely processing the information that somewhere provides. And have you ever sat across from someone whose formal credentials were modest, whose academic achievements were unremarkable, whose capacity for the kind of abstract analytical reasoning that standardized tests are designed to measure was entirely ordinary, and felt something entirely different? A quality of aliveness to the moment, a quality of genuine interest in the actual person in front of them. A quality of understanding that arrived not through the processing of information about you, but through something more immediate and more accurate and more useful in the actual situation of a real human encounter. The quality, in other words, of someone who actually knew where they were and who they were with, and what was actually happening between them, in a way that the brilliant, credentialed, analytically impressive person across the previous table did not. If both of these experiences are familiar to you, you have perceived something that Yuval Noah Harari has been articulating with increasing urgency and increasing specificity across his recent work and his recent public engagements. Something that the institutions of the modern world, the universities and the corporations and the governments and the testing agencies and the hiring systems and the educational frameworks that have organized the distribution of opportunity and recognition across the last several centuries have been systematically undervaluing, systematically failing to develop, and systematically failing to reward in ways that are now, in the specific conditions of the present moment, becoming not merely a philosophical concern, but an existential one. The claim is this: true intelligence in the conditions of 2026 and the decades ahead is not primarily mental. It is not the capacity to process large quantities of information rapidly. It is not the ability to construct logically coherent arguments. It is not the technical mastery of complex domains of knowledge. It is not the analytical precision that allows the decomposition of complicated problems into their component parts and their reassembly into elegant solutions. These capacities are real, they are valuable, and they are genuinely a component of what intelligence means in any complete account of the term. But they are not, in the specific conditions of the present moment, the most important component. They are not the component that is most differentially valuable in a world in which artificial intelligence systems are demonstrating an expanding and rapidly improving capacity to perform most of the cognitive operations that the educational and institutional systems of the modern world have been treating as the primary definition and the primary measure of intelligence itself. The most important component of intelligence in the conditions that are now being created is emotional. And by emotional, Harari does not mean what the popular discourse about emotional intelligence has sometimes reduced that term to. He does not mean the ability to manage one's feelings in professionally appropriate ways, to maintain composure under pressure, to perform empathy in social contexts that reward its performance. He means something considerably deeper and considerably more demanding than any of those things. He means the specific capacity of a conscious being to know with genuine accuracy and genuine honesty what is actually happening inside itself and inside the people it is in relationship with, and to navigate the full complexity of human reality from that knowing rather than from the abstract conceptual frameworks that intellectual intelligence alone provides. To understand why this capacity has become the defining intelligence of the present moment requires understanding what the present moment is actually asking of human beings. And that requires, as Harari always insists, starting not with the present, but with the history that produced it. For most of the period that we call modernity, the specific form of intelligence that the institutions of modern civilization most consistently rewarded was the form that the industrial economy most directly required: the capacity to process defined inputs according to defined procedures and produce defined outputs reliably and efficiently, the capacity to master established bodies of knowledge and apply them to specified categories of problem, the capacity to reason analytically, to follow logical chains from premises to conclusions, to manipulate abstract symbols according to formal rules. These capacities were what the factory floor needed from its workers, what the bureaucracy needed from its clerks, what the professions needed from their practitioners, and what the universities designed to produce workers for all of these institutions organized their curricula around developing and their examinations around measuring. The intelligence that was not rewarded, the intelligence that did not show up in the examinations, that did not determine who received the scholarships and the promotions and the professional recognition, that the institutions of modernity had no reliable mechanism for measuring and therefore no compelling incentive to develop, was the intelligence that operated in the domain of human experience itself. The intelligence of genuine self-awareness. The intelligence of accurate perception of other people's internal states. The intelligence of understanding what is actually happening in a human situation as opposed to what the formal categories available for describing it suggest should be happening. The intelligence, in short, of genuine emotional reality. This neglect was not irrational in the context of the economy that generated it. The industrial economy did not primarily need human beings who were good at understanding themselves and other people. It needed human beings who were good at performing specified cognitive operations reliably and efficiently. The machines of the industrial era could handle the physical work. The human beings were required for the cognitive work, and the cognitive work required was largely the kind that could be specified in advance, learned through formal instruction, and evaluated through formal testing. Emotional intelligence, in any deep sense of that term, was not on the list of requirements. It was at best a social lubricant that made the workplaces where cognitive work occurred more pleasant. At worst, it was a distraction, a source of the irrationality and the interpersonal complexity that good institutional design was supposed to minimize. The educational systems that modernity built to produce workers for this economy were, naturally, organized around the development and the measurement of the cognitive capacities the economy required. Mathematics, logic, language, the mastery of established bodies of factual knowledge, the ability to reason analytically, and to communicate the results of that reasoning in standardized formats. These became the primary currencies of educational achievement, the measures against which children and young adults were sorted into the tracks that would determine their economic opportunities and their social positions for the remainder of their lives. The child who could solve the equation, parse the sentence, recall the historical dates, construct the argument correctly, was the child who received the recognition, the resources, and the trajectory toward the opportunities that the economy was offering as rewards for this particular form of intelligence. The child who understood, with unusual accuracy, what other people were feeling and why. The child who was exquisitely sensitive to the emotional dynamics of the groups they moved through. The child who had an extraordinary capacity for genuine empathy, for the imaginative inhabitation of other people's experiences, for the perception of the unspoken dimensions of human situations that formal analysis consistently fails to capture. This child received, from most of the institutions organized to evaluate intelligence, either no particular recognition or, in many cases, active discouragement. Their sensitivity was interpreted as instability. Their emotional perceptiveness was interpreted as distraction from the cognitive work that the curriculum required. Their tendency to experience and express the emotional reality of situations was interpreted as immaturity to be grown out of, rather than intelligence to be developed. This is the historical background against which Harari's claim about the nature of true intelligence in the present moment must be understood. The claim is not simply that emotional intelligence has always been undervalued, though it has been. It is that the conditions of the present moment are creating a specific convergence of developments that make the differential between cognitive and emotional intelligence more consequential than it has ever been in the history of modern civilization, and that make the specific capacities that genuine emotional intelligence comprises more urgently necessary for human flourishing, for the maintenance of meaningful human relationships and communities, and for the navigation of the specific crises and challenges that the present moment is generating than at any previous point in recorded human history. The first development creating this convergence is the one that Harari has addressed most extensively across his work: the development of artificial intelligence systems with genuine, expanding, and rapidly improving capacity to perform the cognitive operations that the modern economy has been using as its primary definition of intelligence. The capacity to process information, to construct arguments, to master bodies of knowledge, to apply analytical frameworks to specified categories of problem, to generate solutions to defined challenges, to produce text and code and analysis and recommendation and creative content of sufficient quality and sufficient variety to meet a growing proportion of the market demand for these outputs that was previously met by human cognitive workers. This development does not make human cognitive intelligence worthless. It does not render analytical reasoning, logical precision, or the mastery of complex knowledge domains irrelevant, but it dramatically changes the differential value of these capacities relative to the capacities that AI systems cannot replicate, because the capacities that AI systems cannot replicate are, by definition, the ones that will remain differentially valuable in an economy that increasingly treats cognitive operations as commodities that can be produced more efficiently by AI systems than by the human beings who once had a monopoly on them, and the capacities that AI systems cannot replicate, at least not in any form that is functional in the actual conditions of human life as it is actually lived, are precisely the capacities that constitute genuine emotional intelligence. Not emotional performance, which can be simulated with increasing sophistication by the same large language models that are now writing legal documents and diagnosing medical images, but genuine emotional intelligence in the deep sense that Harari is pointing toward. The capacity to actually know what one is experiencing, to actually know what another person is experiencing, to navigate the gap between what is said and what is meant, between what is expressed and what is felt, between what a situation appears to be and what it actually is, with the accuracy that genuine contact with emotional reality provides, and that no amount of pattern matching on linguistic or behavioral data can replicate. This distinction matters enormously, and it is one that the popular discourse about emotional intelligence has not always made clearly enough. There is a performance of emotional intelligence, a set of social behaviors, verbal strategies, and interpersonal techniques that can be learned, practiced, and deployed with sufficient skill to pass, in many contexts, for the genuine article. This performance is what most corporate emotional intelligence training programs are designed to develop. It is what the popular books on the subject primarily teach. It is a set of techniques for presenting oneself as emotionally intelligent, for communicating in ways that other people experience as empathetic and attuned, for managing social situations in ways that produce the relational outcomes that social intelligence in a professional context is supposed to produce. This performance is not without value. The techniques are real and their effects are real, but it is importantly different from the genuine article in a way that, in the conditions of the present moment, matters more and more. Because the genuine article is not a set of techniques, it is a capacity. The capacity for genuine contact with emotional reality, one's own and other people's, that produces accurate understanding of what is actually happening in human situations, rather than pattern-matched approximation of what situations of this apparent type usually contain. And AI systems, which are extraordinarily good at pattern-matched approximation of almost everything they have been trained on, are not good at genuine contact with emotional reality, because genuine contact with emotional reality requires something that AI systems do not have: experience. Actual first-person, embodied, felt experience of what it is like to be a specific human being moving through the specific circumstances of a specific human life. This is the second development creating the convergence that Harari is pointing toward. As AI systems become more sophisticated in their ability to simulate emotional intelligence, the distinction between the simulation and the genuine article becomes both more important and more difficult to maintain in the ways that institutional systems have historically made distinctions between different types and levels of intelligence. The person who is genuinely emotionally intelligent is not simply better at the same things that AI emotional simulation does. They are doing something categorically different. Something that emerges from the actual, lived, first-person experience of being a conscious entity embedded in a network of genuine relationships with other conscious entities in a shared physical and social reality. Something that no amount of training on human-generated data about emotional experience can reproduce, because the training data is about the experience, and the genuine intelligence emerges from the experience itself. Consider what this means in practice. In the specific situations where the distinction between genuine emotional intelligence and its simulation is most consequential, the doctor whose patient is frightened and in pain does not primarily need a physician who can accurately diagnose their condition. Though accurate diagnosis is essential, they need a physician who can actually be with them in the reality of their fear and their pain, who can communicate through the quality of their presence as much as through the content of their words, that they actually understand what the patient is going through, who can make decisions that take into account not only the medical dimensions of the situation, but the human dimensions in all their specificity and complexity. This capacity cannot be replicated by an AI diagnostic system, however accurate that system's diagnoses may be, because it is not a capacity for accurate information processing. It is a capacity for genuine human presence. The therapist whose client is navigating a crisis does not primarily need a mental health professional who can correctly identify the diagnostic category that the client's symptoms belong to and correctly apply the evidence-based intervention associated with that category. They need a therapist who can actually understand from the inside of genuine human empathy rather than from the outside of diagnostic expertise what it feels like to be this specific person in this specific crisis, and who can communicate that understanding in a way that gives the client the experience of being genuinely known rather than professionally processed. This capacity is not a technique. It is not a set of therapeutic skills that can be learned through study and practice, in the way that cognitive skills can be learned through study and practice. It is an expression of a developed capacity for genuine contact with another person's inner experience that is inseparable from the therapist's own developed relationship with their own inner experience. The leader whose organization is facing a genuinely unprecedented challenge does not primarily need an executive who can process the relevant data and derive the analytically optimal strategy, though that capacity has value. They need a leader who can actually understand, in real time and with genuine accuracy, what their people are experiencing, what they fear, what they need, what they are capable of, and what kind of leadership will actually call forth from them the quality of effort and creativity and commitment that the unprecedented challenge requires. This understanding cannot be achieved through the analysis of engagement survey data, however comprehensive. It requires the kind of genuine attunement to the human reality of the people one is leading that is the expression of developed emotional intelligence in its fullest sense. The parent whose child is struggling does not primarily need a caregiver who can correctly identify the developmental stage the child is in and correctly apply the parenting strategy associated with that stage. They need a parent who can actually see this specific child, not as a developmental category, but as a specific human being with a specific inner life, specific fears, specific needs, specific capacities, and a specific relationship to the specific reality of their specific circumstances. This kind of seeing is the most demanding expression of emotional intelligence, and it is the one that has the most profound and the most lasting consequences for the development of the human beings who are the recipients of it or the absence of it. In each of these cases, and in the thousands of other situations that the daily conduct of human life regularly presents, the capacity that is most consequential is not the capacity to process information correctly. It is the capacity to actually be present to the human reality of the situation, to see it, feel it, understand it from the inside of genuine human experience rather than from the outside of analytical expertise. to respond to it not merely with the correct application of established knowledge, but with the quality of genuine human contact that the situation and the human beings in it actually require. This is what Harari means when he says that true intelligence today is emotional rather than mental. Not that mental intelligence is irrelevant, but that in the specific conditions of the present moment, the differential value of mental intelligence is declining as AI systems demonstrate expanding capacity to perform its operations, while the differential value of emotional intelligence is increasing as the specifically human dimensions of the situations that matter most become more visible in their importance, precisely because the non-human alternative is becoming more available and more clearly limited in exactly the ways that the human alternative is not. The third development creating the convergence that Harari identifies is perhaps the most profound and the most poorly understood. It is the specific character of the crises that the present moment is generating and the specific character of the intelligence that navigating those crises requires. The crises of the present moment are not primarily technical crises. They are not crises of insufficient information, insufficient analytical capacity, insufficient technical sophistication. They are crises of human relationship, human community, human meaning, human identity, and human values. Crises that have been produced in significant part by the excessive application of technical rationality to domains of human life that technical rationality was never adequate to govern. Crises that cannot be resolved through the application of more technical rationality because the application of more technical rationality to the conditions it has already helped to create is precisely not the kind of intelligence that those conditions require. The crisis of loneliness and disconnection that has reached epidemic proportions in the wealthiest and most technologically advanced societies in human history is not a technical problem. It is not a problem of insufficient communication technology, though the specific forms of communication technology that have proliferated most widely have contributed significantly to it. It is a crisis of genuine human contact, of the quality of presence to one another that genuine relationship requires, of the capacity for the kind of deep, sustained, attentive engagement with another person's actual inner life that constitutes the form of connection that human beings actually need rather than the high-frequency, low-depth, algorithmically mediated simulacrum of connection that the contemporary social environment most efficiently provides. This crisis requires for its navigation exactly the intelligence that has been most consistently undervalued by the institutions of modernity. The intelligence of genuine emotional contact, the crisis of political polarization that is fracturing the democratic societies that the liberal tradition of the last several centuries has built, is not a crisis of insufficient information or insufficient analytical capacity. Both sides of every significant contemporary political divide have access to more information than any previous political generation in human history, and both sides include people of considerable analytical intelligence whose capacity for constructing logically coherent arguments in support of their positions is entirely genuine. The crisis is not cognitive, it is emotional. It is a crisis of the capacity to actually understand from the inside of genuine empathy rather than from the outside of analytical disagreement what the people whose positions differ most dramatically from one's own are actually experiencing, what they actually fear, what they actually value, what the world actually looks like from inside the specific combination of circumstances and experiences that has produced their specific political orientation. Without this capacity, the cognitive intelligence deployed in political argument produces not understanding but more sophisticated versions of the incomprehension and the contempt that are fueling the polarization rather than resolving it. The crisis of meaning and purpose that Harari has identified as one of the central pathologies of the contemporary moment, the epidemic of emptiness and purposelessness in the middle of unprecedented material abundance, is not a crisis that additional cognitive intelligence can address. The people experiencing it are not experiencing it because they lack the analytical capacity to identify the sources of their distress or the intellectual framework to understand their situation. Many of them have extensive analytical capacity and sophisticated intellectual frameworks. What they lack is not more thinking. What they lack is the specific capacity for genuine contact with their own inner experience that would allow them to actually know what they are feeling, why they are feeling it, what they actually value, what would actually make their existence feel genuinely inhabited rather than perpetually deferred. These are not cognitive questions, they are emotional ones. And the intelligence required to navigate them is emotional in exactly the sense that the institutions of modernity have been least equipped to develop and least inclined to reward. The fourth dimension of Harari's analysis of emotional intelligence concerns what it actually consists of, at the level of specific capacities rather than general descriptions. Because the term emotional intelligence has been used in enough different ways by enough different traditions of thought and enough different commercial and institutional enterprises that it is important to be specific about what the genuinely valuable form of it comprises. The first and most fundamental component is self-knowledge. Not self-knowledge in the sense of knowing one's personality type or one's attachment style or one's communication preferences, the kind of self-knowledge that psychological tests and personality frameworks provide and that most corporate emotional intelligence programs treat as the primary form. But self-knowledge in the deeper sense of actually knowing with genuine accuracy and genuine honesty what one is experiencing, what one is actually feeling, as distinct from what one thinks one should be feeling, or what one has been trained to perform feeling, what one actually values, as distinct from what one's cultural context and social identity require one to claim to value. What one actually fears as distinct from the more socially acceptable concerns that one substitutes for the genuine fears when the genuine fears are too exposing or too uncomfortable to acknowledge directly. This form of self-knowledge is rare. It is rare because it is genuinely difficult to achieve in the conditions of the contemporary environment, which provides continuous opportunities and continuous incentives for the avoidance of genuine self-encounter. It is rare because it is genuinely uncomfortable in ways that the intelligence required to master a technical domain, however demanding that mastery might be, is not uncomfortable in the same way. The discomfort of genuine self-knowledge is not the discomfort of intellectual difficulty. It is the discomfort of confronting things about oneself, about one's own motivations, one's own fears, one's own patterns of avoidance and self-deception that the self has invested considerable energy in not confronting. The person who actually knows what they are feeling in real time and with genuine accuracy is a person who has done an unusual amount of work to develop the relationship with their own inner experience that genuine self-knowledge requires. They have, in some form and through some practice, develop the capacity to observe their own emotional states directly rather than through the distorting lens of the stories they prefer to tell about themselves. They have developed the willingness to notice what they are actually experiencing, even when what they are actually experiencing is inconsistent with the self-image they maintain. They have developed the tolerance for the discomfort of genuine self-honesty that most people, most of the time, manage by maintaining a strategic distance from their own actual inner states through the mechanisms of busyness, distraction, rationalization, and the continuous performance of a more acceptable version of their inner life for the audiences, both external and internal, that they are always, to some degree, playing to. The second component of genuine emotional intelligence is empathy in its deepest and most demanding form. Not the performance of empathy, which is a social skill that can be developed through practice and deployed with considerable sophistication without requiring any genuine contact with another person's actual experience. But the genuine capacity to actually inhabit, however briefly and however imperfectly, another person's perspective. To understand, from the inside of that perspective, what the world looks like and feels like from there. Not to agree with that perspective. Not to validate every response that emerges from it, but to genuinely understand it, with the accuracy and the completeness that only genuine imaginative inhabitation rather than external analytical assessment can provide. This form of empathy is not an emotion in the ordinary sense. It is a capacity, a developed, cultivable, but also genuinely demanding capacity for a specific kind of imaginative extension beyond the boundaries of one's own perspective into the genuine interiority of another person's experience. It requires the specific willingness to temporarily suspend one's own perspective, with all the certainties and the values and the prior judgments that it contains, in order to actually inhabit another perspective with sufficient thoroughness to understand it from the inside rather than from the outside. This suspension is not intellectual. It is something closer to what actors describe when they talk about genuinely inhabiting a character rather than performing one from the outside. It requires a kind of internal flexibility, a kind of self-detachment that is in direct tension with the self-protective functions of the ego that most people have not developed the capacity to temporarily and deliberately override. The third component is emotional regulation, not the suppression of emotional experience, not the performance of equanimity that maintains a composed exterior while the interior is churning. Genuine emotional regulation, in the sense that genuine psychological health and genuine intelligence require, is the capacity to experience the full range of emotional states without being either overwhelmed by them or defended against them. To feel what one feels with the full intensity of genuine feeling while maintaining the capacity to observe what one is feeling, to understand why one is feeling it, and to choose with greater freedom than automatic emotional reactivity provides what to do with the feeling rather than simply enacting its first-order impulse. This capacity is not equanimity in the Stoic sense of emotional minimization. It is the opposite. It is the capacity for fuller emotional experience, not diminished emotional experience, combined with the relationship to that experience that prevents it from simply determining behavior automatically. The person who has developed genuine emotional regulation does not feel less. They often feel more with greater precision and greater depth than the person who has developed the defended distance from their own emotional states that many people mistake for emotional maturity. What they have developed is not a smaller emotional life, but a more sophisticated relationship to their emotional life. One that allows them to be moved without being swept away, to be affected without being determined, to respond with greater freedom and greater accuracy to emotional reality rather than simply reacting to it. The fourth component is what might be called relational intelligence, the specific capacity to understand the dynamics of human relationships, not in the abstract but in the specific, as they are actually operating in the specific relationships and the specific situations of one's actual life, to perceive the unspoken dimensions of a conversation, to understand what is actually happening between people beneath the surface of what is being said, to navigate the complex, often contradictory, always partly opaque reality of human relationships with the accuracy that comes from genuine attunement to the emotional reality they contain, rather than the accuracy that comes from the application of theoretical frameworks about how relationships work. This capacity is the one that most clearly distinguishes human intelligence from even the most sophisticated forms of AI social cognition. AI systems can learn the patterns of human social behavior with extraordinary comprehensiveness. They can identify the statistical regularities in how human beings communicate and relate and respond to each other with greater precision than any individual human observer. But they cannot be in relationship, in the genuine sense that the word relationship implies when applied to conscious beings with actual inner lives. They cannot bring to the understanding of a specific human situation the quality of genuine presence, genuine attunement, and genuine care for the actual person that the situation contains, that constitutes the irreducible human dimension of relational intelligence. The fifth dimension of Harari's analysis concerns the specific conditions that develop genuine emotional intelligence and the specific conditions that prevent its development. Because the claim that emotional intelligence is the defining intelligence of the present moment is not very useful if the capacities that constitute it are fixed, if some people are simply born with high emotional intelligence and others are not, and the distribution of these capacities across the population is determined by genetic endowment rather than by the conditions within which human beings develop and live. The evidence from developmental psychology, from clinical practice, from the neuroscience of emotion, and from the comparative study of how different cultural and institutional environments shape emotional development suggests something more complex and considerably more hopeful than the fixed capacity model. Emotional intelligence in the genuine sense, the capacity for accurate self-knowledge, deep empathy, genuine emotional regulation, and sophisticated relational understanding is not primarily a fixed endowment. It is primarily a developmental achievement. It is not evenly distributed across the population, not primarily because of genetic differences in emotional capacity, but primarily because of differences in the conditions of development, in the quality of the early relational environment, in the cultural norms around emotional expression and emotional education, in the institutional frameworks that either support or undermine the development of emotional awareness, and in the personal practices and commitments that individuals either do or do not bring to the deliberate cultivation of their own emotional intelligence across the course of their lives. This has enormous implications. It means that the distribution of emotional intelligence across the population is not fixed. It means that the conditions that develop emotional intelligence can be created at the scale of families, schools, workplaces, and cultural institutions by the deliberate choices of the people and the institutions with the power to shape those conditions. And it means that the individual who recognizes the importance of genuine emotional intelligence can take deliberate, practical, consequential steps to develop it in themselves, not merely through the acquisition of knowledge about emotional intelligence, but through the specific practices that actually develop the capacities emotional intelligence comprises. What are those practices? Harari's own account points consistently toward a small number of disciplines that share the characteristic of bringing the practitioner into genuine, sustained, direct contact with their own inner experience in ways that the default condition of the contemporary environment consistently prevents. The most fundamental is the practice of genuine, sustained self-observation. The deliberate, repeated, patient practice of actually noticing what one is experiencing as it is being experienced, rather than what one thinks one should be experiencing or what the interpretation of the experience that one reaches for automatically suggests one is experiencing. This practice sounds simple and proves in actual practice to be one of the most demanding things a human being can attempt. Because the mind's automatic tendency is to immediately interpret experience through the frameworks of the self-narrative it is continuously maintaining, rather than to observe it directly before the interpretive frameworks arrive. Developing the capacity to actually see one's own experience before interpreting it is the foundation of genuine emotional intelligence, and it cannot be developed through intellectual effort alone. It requires the specific kind of practice that meditation in its various forms provides, and that other contemplative and reflective disciplines have developed, each in their own way, as their central offering. The second practice is the cultivation of genuine curiosity about other people's inner lives. Not performed interest, not the social skill of appearing interested in the people one is talking to, but genuine, open, non-presumptuous curiosity about what it is actually like to be the specific person one is with. The practice of approaching each human encounter with the genuine openness of not already knowing what the person in front of one is experiencing, feeling, thinking, or needing. The practice of actually listening rather than preparing one's next statement. The practice of actually seeking to understand another person's perspective rather than efficiently identifying the points at which it differs from one's own. These are not natural habits for a mind shaped by the evolutionary imperatives that built human social cognition for a competitive tribal environment. They are cultivated habits developed through the specific kinds of relationship, the specific kinds of conversation, the specific kinds of encounter with difference that make genuine understanding of other people's inner lives possible. The third practice is the deliberate cultivation of the conditions within which genuine emotional experience is possible. The protection of time and space for actual feeling, as opposed to the management of feeling at the safe distance that the contemporary environment's continuous stimulation and continuous social performance so consistently provides as an alternative to actual emotional experience. This means, practically, the cultivation of genuine solitude, genuine quiet, genuine intervals of unmediated contact with one's own inner life. It means the protection of relationships deep enough and safe enough to allow genuine emotional expression rather than the performed emotional presentations that most contemporary social environments reward. It means the development of a personal relationship with difficulty, with discomfort, with the full range of emotional experience, including the painful parts, that is characterized by genuine engagement rather than the management and the avoidance that most people substitute for genuine engagement with the more challenging dimensions of their emotional lives. The sixth dimension of Harari's analysis concerns the institutional implications of the primacy of emotional intelligence. The question of what it would mean at the scale of schools and universities and workplaces and political institutions to actually organize the development and the recognition of human intelligence around a genuine understanding of what kind of intelligence the conditions of the present moment most require. The implications are substantial and in most contemporary institutional contexts genuinely radical. They would mean reorienting educational systems away from the almost exclusive focus on cognitive performance that standardized testing enforces toward the development of the specific capacities that genuine emotional intelligence comprises. Genuine self-knowledge, genuine empathy, genuine emotional regulation, genuine relational understanding. These are not soft skills to be tacked on to the curriculum as optional additions to the real work of cognitive development. They are the capacities that the conditions of the present moment most urgently require, and their development requires the same deliberate, sustained, institutionally supported investment of resources and attention that the development of cognitive skills has received for the entirety of the modern educational enterprise. In practice, this means educational environments that treat genuine emotional development with the seriousness that cognitive development has received. Environments in which children are taught, not merely as a social courtesy, but as a core intellectual discipline, to accurately identify and express what they are actually feeling, in which the development of genuine empathy is treated as a skill with the same developmental trajectory and the same need for deliberate cultivation that mathematics or language receives, in which the quality of attention, the capacity for genuine presence to one's own experience and to other people's experience, is recognized as a foundational capacity that everything else depends on rather than a peripheral nicety that the real curriculum can proceed without. In the domain of work and organizational life, the implications are equally significant. They mean hiring and promotion decisions that actually prioritize genuine emotional intelligence, rather than merely performing the language of emotional intelligence while continuing to make consequential decisions primarily on the basis of cognitive credentials and analytical performance. They mean organizational cultures that actually create the conditions within which genuine emotional honesty is possible rather than rewarding the sophisticated performance of emotional management. They mean leadership development that actually develops the specific capacities of genuine emotional intelligence rather than the social skills that simulate it. And they mean organizational assessments that can actually distinguish between the genuine article and the performance of it, a distinction that is considerably harder to make institutionally than the distinction between high and low scores on the cognitive assessments that institutions have been using to evaluate human intelligence for the entirety of the modern era. The seventh dimension, and the one that brings all the others into a coherent whole, is the deepest one. It concerns the relationship between genuine emotional intelligence and the specific quality of human consciousness that Harari, across the full sweep of his work, regards as the most important and most endangered capacity of the present moment. The relationship is this: genuine emotional intelligence is not merely a useful capacity for navigating the specific conditions of the present economy or the specific crises of the present moment. Though it is both of those things, it is the expression in the domain of human relationship and human self-understanding of the same quality of genuine presence to reality that Harari identifies in every domain he examines as the most fundamental prerequisite for any kind of authentic human engagement with the actual conditions of actual existence. The person who actually knows what they are feeling is not merely more effective in their relationships or more successful in their professional life, though they may be both of those things. They are more actually alive in the most fundamental sense. They are more genuinely present to their own experience. They are in actual contact with the reality of their own inner life, rather than in the managed, performed, strategically distanced relationship with their own experience that the contemporary environment so efficiently provides as a substitute for genuine contact. And the person who can actually understand what another person is experiencing, who can actually be with another person in the genuine reality of their specific inner life, is not merely more effective at navigating human relationships, though they are. They are doing something that is, in Harari's framework, among the most fundamentally valuable things that a conscious being can do. They are actually making contact, actually encountering another consciousness in the specific reality of its experience, actually being in relationship in the full sense of that word, as opposed to being in the managed social performance of relationship that the contemporary world so efficiently provides as a substitute for the genuine thing. This is why genuine emotional intelligence is not simply a useful addition to cognitive intelligence, a complement to the analytical capacities that the modern educational system develops. It is, in Harari's analysis, a different order of intelligence altogether. Not a different kind of information processing, a different quality of being, a different quality of presence to the reality of one's own experience and to the reality of the people and the world one is in relationship with. The quality of presence that all the contemplative traditions of human history have identified as the foundation of genuine wisdom, genuine compassion, and genuine understanding. The quality of presence that the conditions of the present moment are making more urgently necessary, more differentially valuable, and more clearly foundational to everything else that human intelligence, in its fullest sense, is capable of producing. In the decades ahead, as artificial intelligence systems take over more and more of the cognitive operations that the modern economy has been treating as the primary expression of human intelligence, the human beings who thrive will not primarily be the ones who can outperform AI systems at cognitive tasks. They will be the ones who have developed the specific capacities that no amount of artificial intelligence will replicate. The capacity to actually know themselves, the capacity to actually know other people, the capacity to be genuinely present with the full quality of conscious attention that genuine presence requires to the actual reality of the human situations they are in. The capacity to navigate the complexity of human relationships, human communities, human meaning, and human values with the accuracy and the depth and the genuine care that the intelligence of genuine emotional contact provides. These capacities are not given. They are not automatic. They are not the inevitable product of simply being human, though every human being has the potential to develop them. They are the product of the specific, sustained, genuinely demanding work of developing a genuine relationship with one's own inner life and with the inner lives of the people one is in genuine relationship with. The work that the contemporary environment does everything in its considerable power to prevent. The work that the contemplative traditions of every culture in human history have identified as the most important work a human being can undertake. The work that the conditions of the present moment are, for the first time in the history of modern civilization, making not merely spiritually important, but economically decisive, socially necessary, and politically urgent. True intelligence today is not mental, it is emotional, not because thinking has become unimportant, but because thinking, in the specific form that the institutions of modernity developed and rewarded, is becoming something that machines can do at least as well as human beings, and often considerably better. And because the intelligence that machines cannot replicate, the intelligence that emerges from actual conscious experience of actual human life, the intelligence of genuine self-knowledge and genuine empathy and genuine relational understanding and genuine presence to the full reality of what it means to be alive in a specific human body, in a specific set of relationships, in a specific moment of this extraordinary and profoundly uncertain human story, is the intelligence that the present moment most urgently requires from each of us. From all of us, from the civilization we are trying, together and with very uneven success, to build into something worthy of the consciousness that makes the building possible. The question is not whether you have this intelligence. You have the capacity for it. Every conscious human being does. The question is whether you are developing it, whether the conditions of your life, the choices you are making about where to invest your attention and your effort and your time are the conditions that develop the most important form of human intelligence available in the present moment, or whether they are the conditions that the contemporary environment most efficiently provides as a substitute for developing it. The question is whether you are choosing, deliberately and with genuine understanding of what is at stake, to become more genuinely intelligent in the way that the present present moment most urgently requires, or whether you are simply becoming more informed, more efficient, more optimized in exactly the dimensions of human performance that the systems surrounding you are most efficiently making obsolete. The choice, in whatever degree it is a choice, is yours. And in whatever degree it is yours, it may be the most important choice available to you in the conditions of the world that currently exists.